All right, we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Melanie Harris. I'm a strategy director with Complete College America, and I work closely with our New England region and Midwest region. I'm excited to bring you part 3 of our 8-week calendar series today. This session is being recorded and will be available to you after the session. And we'll also share some links in the chat box so that you can access other information from part 1 and part 2. I do want to share that our registration is open and we're inviting you to join us October 26th through the 30th as we engage our community in some of the most critical conversations we'll ever have, teeing up some of the biggest challenges we'll ever tackle during our With Equity and Justice for All virtual event. I will drop the link in the chat box. I encourage you to explore the sessions and register. Recordings will also be available for those, but joining live, you'll be able to ask questions to our amazing panelists. So welcome to our CCA Live series. We understand that you might be zoomed out and we're grateful that you've decided to spend an hour with us today. Each of our sessions feature experts who will provide you with valuable insight and information as we continue to navigate these unprecedented times. I encourage you to bookmark our CCA Live website to check out past sessions, including candid conversations with President Dr. Yolanda Watson-Spiva and leaders from a variety of organizations, including Excellencia, NACADA, and NIPSI, and past webinars with ACRO, accreditors across the nation, and other higher education leaders. Thank you for joining us for part 3, setting the stage to serve today's students of our 8-week calendars series, featuring the outstanding work done at Waukesha County Technical College in Wisconsin. This 3-part series features blog posts and accompanying webinars, which are all accessible on our website. Hopefully you were able to attend or watch part 1 or part 2, but I'll add the link soon. I encourage you to send questions today via the Q&A box at the bottom and chat with other attendees in the chat function. We've built in time towards the end of the webinar to answer your questions, and our amazing panelists will be typing answers along the session as well. So I would like to turn it over to Brad Piazza and Nicole Gahagan to introduce the team.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to our 3rd and final webinar, talking about the work that we've done at Waukesha County Technical College and converting to the 8-week terms. I'm excited to tell you that yesterday we started term 2 of our fall semester, which is awesome. We survived the first 8 weeks. And so today we have a special treat for all of you and what's going to be a whirlwind hour. As you know, Nicole and I have had the pleasure of being able to lead this work at WCTC, but it is not without the work of many people on campus, some of whom I noticed are on the webinar today. But we wanted to bring in some of our colleagues to really talk specifically about some of the nuts and bolts of the work that we were doing in preparation for the 8-week calendar, actually prior to even thinking about the 8-week calendar, and then certainly as we started to get into the implementation. So we brought along 5 of our colleagues today. We trust you guys are probably tired of listening to us talk anyway, and thought we would share the love with some of the people that have done an incredible amount of work in helping get us to the point of being able to launch in fall 1. I'm going to introduce them real quickly in the order that they're going to be presenting, and then we're going to get rolling. And as a reminder, this is the 3rd and final of this webinar series. So Bethany Leonard, who is our Dean of Academic Foundations and General Studies, and also was the co-lead on the steering team for the academic calendar. Jennifer Fontanini, who is an Associate Dean in the Communication and Social Science Department, which is part of Academic Foundations and General Studies. Brenda Kajowski was one of our outstanding faculty members and really a champion for our work. She is a faculty member in our School of Business. Rachel Burling, who was the other co-lead on this work, along with Bethany. They both led the steering team, and Rachel Burling is our registrar. And last but not least, Chris Dayode, who's our Dean of Student Support at the college. And so with that, buckle up, get ready, and here we go.
Okay, so I'm going to be talking about the Devon. I think is the next slide. Yes. Our developmental education redesign, I think is with many colleges, we aimed to make that pathway of DevEd courses shorter so that students could get to their target post-secondary course more quickly. So on the next slide, I had 2 lower reading courses that we consolidated into one. And then we did similar things with our writing pathway. So on the next slide, you can see we did that same consolidation with the bottom 2. I think we need the bottom 2 into one course. And then again, we employed, as I think many of you may have done, the ALP model, the Accelerated Learning Program, so that students could take that target level English composition course while they were completing the Intro to College Writing course. So if they tested into Intro to College Writing course, they could complete their post-secondary course immediately. Otherwise, there was just one step below that. As we redesigned our developmental education, we did curriculum review of almost all of it. These 2 new courses we developed, we took a lot of new, fresh approaches with strong teaching practices, and then we infused the writing with some reading and the reading with some writing. We also shifted, we were largely individual lab-based instruction. We shifted almost all of our DevEd to classroom-based. And you can see outcomes here, the student percentages of course success for our former model. With a new model, that DevEd course is almost double the completion rate for writing. And reading is very similar in terms of the outcomes. We also took a look at math. We had duplication in math. You can see that the lowest level DevEd is basic math, but then in that second level of DevEd, we have 3 different courses. That's because students would have a different target college level math course depending on the program that they chose. But we ran into some problems with this. If a student finished, for example, the physical math, but then decided they didn't want to go into the program that required it, that means on the next slide, we can see the student would have to go back then and complete the DevEd course that did apply to the program they wanted to get into. And we did a curriculum analysis and found that these 3 secondary level DevEd courses were essentially the same. So we eliminated 2 of them and then streamlined that path for students. So on the next slide. There. Then the next thing we did was on the next slide, we took a look at the basic math course to see how it was preparing students for success in the next level course. This is something we did throughout the DevEd. We found that a lot of the lower level DevEd courses were not directly preparing students for success in the next level course. So we redesigned the curriculum in basic math, and we found that we have increased between 10 and 20% our student success in that pre-algebra course since we made those changes. So in addition to redesigning our developmental education, we employed multiple measures for course placement. For us, multiple measures mean that we offer students multiple opportunities to show readiness. And one of our strong pieces of our philosophy is that we err on the side of readiness, meaning if students show on a number of measures that they're not ready to be placed into college level courses, but even on just one measure, it shows that they are, then we would err on the side of readiness and place them into the college level course. So erring on the side of readiness was something we bore in mind when we established our next generation AccuPlacer cut scores. And this was a mind shift for a number of the people who participated in establishing the cut scores. There were a lot of people who really wanted to hang on to those students better be ready for these courses. And we instead had to shift to erring on the side of readiness and put them in set the cut scores so we could get students in who are minimally qualified. We also established as one of our multiple measures a GPA of 2.6, and that GPA could be up to 15 years old. While we made all of these changes in DevEd, getting into students into the college level courses faster, changes with the multiple measures, the college did a lot of things to help support student success. And here are two of them. I mentioned before we used ALP for those DevEd students who are getting directly into these college level courses on the left. We also constructed a form of instruction that we called enhanced. And you can see the courses that we've delivered in enhanced format. We would have 1 or 2 sections enhanced. That means there was additional time per week in the course and the support of a designated developmental education instructor. And we would open that up for anyone who enrolled, but also we would funnel in students who we thought, even though they weren't DevEd students, even though they placed into post-secondary, they may need some additional help. So this last spring, we got some results from the College Board on a placement validity study. And these results are showing that our GPA of 2.6 is actually a very good tool to use for placing students into these courses. You can see the placement accuracy with the GPA and also the improvement in the accuracy of placement by using that GPA of 2.6. So as we have made all of these changes, there was a bit of worry that perhaps our course success rates might decline. You know, do we know for sure the GPA is going to work? What about the test scores for the AccuPlacer? What about moving people more quickly through DevEd? So on the next slide, I'm showing you a number of our heavy hitter general studies courses. And looking at each of these courses, 83% of the courses listed actually have been showing course success rates that were either improved or that were maintained since we made all of these changes. And in fact, it's only 2 of these courses on this list that just maintained their course success rates. 8 of these courses actually improved their course success rates since we made all of these changes. And I think that Jennifer is next.
Great, thank you, Bethany. Again, my name is Jennifer Fontanini. I had the pleasure of being named to the Domain 1 team early in our process of developing the 8-week calendar. And at that time, we didn't even know we were going to do an 8-week calendar. We were just looking at parameters on which we would want to build a new calendar that would be year-round and more accessible to students. And so we were given some research to look at. We were given some other college models to look at. And essentially the Domain 1 team came up with this set of parameters that we would encourage programs to develop their course sequence to include 30 credits in the first year, that it would be a mix of occupational and general studies courses. General studies courses at our institution are those core courses. And that prerequisite requirements would be looked at and considered and maybe revised if necessary. And then looking at some of the momentum metrics, we determined that we should be offering our math requirement and our English writing requirement in the first year. After these were developed then, we had the work to do of sequencing the programs. And so we needed to figure out a model to use for the entire institution, getting everyone in the room and beginning to think about those 5 criteria that I just spoke of and how the people were going to sequence their courses. And so we created large templates on poster paper. We gave people note cards that had sticky top, and we had them write down every single course they had in a program, including the general courses and the occupational courses. And so they were to have a discussion in their teams about the ideal order of courses for students, knowing what they know, both qualitative and quantitatively from data about what their faculty and students were saying about the course and the course sequence. What order should this be in ideally if there were no boundaries? And so they began placing those in order. Go ahead, Brad. You know, during this process also, we had them kind of look at that definition of prerequisites and determine if that was absolutely needed to move on to the next course. And if it was, put it in. If it's not, take it out. And so we had a lot of cleanup to do there as well in terms of prerequisite. Rachel will talk about that a little later. And so now I'm going to show you some pictures of that process. This is a picture of one of our schools, the dean and the 3 associate deans looking at their program. You can see they have all their courses listed on their orange sheets. They're putting them in the 8-week sequence, fall, spring, summer, 30 credits in the first year, putting math and English in that sequence, and they're talking about it. This took quite a bit of time to be developing this. Go ahead, Brad. After they built that, then they invited other people from around the college to look in. You'll see one of our associate deans here consulting with the Gen Ed dean looking at does this sequence make sense, and talking about why it is that way. We also invited people from outside the program. So here you see 2 of our leaders looking at the different sequence of the different programs they've developed, and asking the curriculum director to come in and say, does this make sense? And from an outside view, this is why we did this, and sort of had to vocalize or justify the decisions they made about the order they chose. Here again, you'll see groups of faculty talking with people from around the college, an associate dean from the general studies areas working with the Department of Health and Health here, looking at the program sequence and asking questions about what does your data tell you, and does this make sense? And then finally at this session, we also had the financial aid director here helping talk about, well, if they take this many credits in this term, does that make sense in terms of financial aid? So we had all players in the room laying out the sequence to be sure it was right, so that we could create that clear pathway to begin. And the last one. Okay, so then more work began, and this was a shift to now the programs themselves and the program faculty. And so it was, how are we going to convert a class from 16 weeks or 12 weeks or 6 weeks to the 8-week process? And so we defined 3 steps. The first step would be to review the competencies in the course. As I think Brad and Nicole wrote in their blog, all competencies are not created equal. We really decided to kind of go with that mantra and look at the number of competencies that were part of a course. Not all competencies deserve the same amount of attention, and some of the more important or critical competencies can get lost in the sheer number of competencies in the course. And so our first was to review the competencies. The second step was to determine course density. And this is to determine whether or not the course was existing with the right things, if there were things in there that were too broad, too specific, or didn't belong there at all. And this is where we really came to the challenge in our conversation about rigor. And I'll talk a little bit about how we decided to work with that issue with our faculty around rigor. And then finally, the step 3 process was format. What format do we deliver this 8-week in a fully face-to-face, in a hybrid model, or fully online? And COVID kind of answered that question for us as we were forced to go fully online. That was actually something that helped us move our understanding of hybrids and online to a more realistic place. And it actually has been beneficial for us. Go ahead, Brad. That's good. So this issue of course density versus rigor, we decided to define it as what do students essentially need to know when they leave the course? Not always do they need to know every single competency at the same level. Some are certainly more critical than others. And so instructors with common courses had to make that determination so that they were all speaking the same language. We had to have a shared understanding of what those critical competencies were. We decided on settling, because of the 8-week format, on no more than determining 3 to 4 critical competencies for the course. We decided to define critical competencies by this definition, 3 big things. The first one was that there should be less density. We have to figure out which of the competencies are musts and which would be nice to have but aren't necessarily part of a course. For example, if you've taught a class at all, you know there are activities that you've developed that you love, but they may not meet the top goal of the class. And so we really had to be honest with ourselves about what are those things that are nice to know, but that students must know. The second of the big 3 was that we had to come to a determination that all the instructors would teach the course in the same order. This was a little bit of a tough sell. For example, in my area, we have 27 sections of English composition and eight full-time faculty and many adjunct. And where they chose to teach the narrative versus the persuasive versus the research pieces all differed depending on what they determined was useful for them and their students. We knew that when we moved to the 8 weeks, however, when students moved around from section to section in the first couple weeks because of work schedule changes, that gave them much less time to make up the differences between the instructor's schedule. And so we had to determine that every course sequence would be identical. And then third, we had to continually ask ourselves, can instructors teach and assess the content and skills that we're saying are critical competencies in these 8 weeks? And can students learn and demonstrate those competencies in 8 weeks? So we started by thinking clearly first about a student. We would put a student picture up on the wall. We would say, this is Justina. Justina is a student in accounting. What does she absolutely have to have from introduction to psychology to be an okay accountant? And so we would talk about what are the really must-haves from that course. We did not start with the competencies. We started with what do we want her to leave our program with? Then we went to what we called the bucket activity, where we had the faculty decide from those things that we think Justina needs to leave our program, knowing our content, what are the 3 most critical? And those 3 most critical competencies will be the ones we push on and organize the course around. Other competencies will be laid within those, or they might be things we touch on and introduce, but we're not teaching to the same degree as those critical competencies. At some time in our work, we also went back to what our advisory boards told us, what is important that they know from this class or that class. And so those industry partners help us keep a laser focus on what students needed to know for the profession they were being trained for. So they began to do this hard work, and it took months of meeting and meeting and meeting and determining, and sometimes coming to consensus and sometimes haggling over which competency is more valuable than the other. You can imagine faculty in a room having these conversations around, well, I think that's more important. No, I think this is more important. And so they had some work to do about that. And it was a really valuable process for them to learn the competencies even more specifically. Then next, they had to sequence those critical competencies. So what order should students be learning them in? Next, they needed to look at, is there a common assessment that should happen after each of these competencies are delivered? Maybe, maybe not. And we aren't here yet, but this is a goal someday we hope to reach, is that we have some kind of version of a common assessment We're battling with the individual creativity and specific skill sets of each faculty versus having a common assessment. So we're still working on that piece. We're not there yet. Next. Yeah, so that's that one. Next. Then we had to design the timeline. How long would each competency be taught before the assessment? And so in the 8-week model, it was pretty much determined that it would be 2 to 3 weeks per competency. And that we really had to be switching to the next competency at the same time, all the instructors across that course. And again, the reason, go back one, Brian. And agreeing, the reason for that was that we really needed to make sure that students were in those first 2 weeks all doing the same thing, so that if they had to switch sections, we commonly, like you, I'm sure, have students who had a work schedule change and need to switch sections, or they have a life situation that's gotten the way of them attending class at this particular time. And so we need to be able to move them around in those first 1 or 2 weeks between sections. And we need to determine they're not losing any time, because 8 weeks is just too short of time for us to lose any time with them. Okay, I think I'm done. On to you, Brenda.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Brenda Kajowski, and I've had the privilege of leading the instructional design faculty professional development sub-team. I think the longest name of any of the sub-teams, but we had important work to do. The sub-team was comprised of 9 faculty members from across the college, pretty representative of the various schools that make up WCTC. But the common theme was all the team members were proven innovators that had already perhaps taught 8-week classes using various instructional design strategies like flipped classroom to effectively facilitate a hybrid learning environment, competency-based education, perhaps universal learning design. All of the faculty members on the team have used various types of educational technology and active learning strategies. So anyhow, the team members were already very skilled at how you might effectively facilitate an 8-week course. And so they were in a good position to help do the planning and facilitation of the professional development for the other faculty, as well as coaching them as we are going through this transition period. Next slide, please. So one of the big things that we did is we planned several different professional development events. And our first event was in mid-November. We had our first in-service. And for that one, we just kind of drew upon the experiences that our team members had as they first had gone through and converted from 16 to 8 weeks and had done those first time taught of those courses and gone through all of those learnings. And we brainstormed a lot of very important topics that people needed to think about. Things like Jennifer had already talked about, that we needed to be very careful in selecting what we would retain in an 8-week course, and some of the other foundational ideas. We developed some templates and we rolled those out as part of the in-service to help people with their planning. We put all these brainstormed ideas into 3 tracks, and kind of an introductory, intermediate, and more advanced track. But we, allowed people to choose their own pathway, because every faculty member is at a different starting point. And that was one of the things that made it challenging but interesting, that we had such a diverse group of faculty colleagues that we were trying to do this professional development with. One of the very important outcomes of that event was we got some great feedback from faculty about what they wanted more of, what perhaps we didn't have in our first event that they needed to know, and some other things that we could do to develop our second event, which was mid-January, I guess. It was pretty quickly after our first event. And so we used all that input to design our second professional development event. And one of the really important adds was to design in supported work time. So one of the things we did is we defined different places on campus where faculty would meet, and we would have some of our team members, some of our academic excellence team members, other experts from around the campus, so that as faculty were in there talking through and planning some of the things that they would do to convert their courses, they could draw upon the expertise, and we could have some good discussions around the planning for conversion. So a lot of that started in January. Then we were going to do an event about mid-spring, and of course that got canceled. So then we changed our sights on doing a virtual event mid-June, and that was really quite successful. We planned sessions each day throughout the week and spread them out so people could pick and choose and participate as much as they'd like. Of course, they were all facilitated via Zoom sessions. And so we recorded them all and made them available to faculty. If they weren't available that week, they could still watch those sessions and learn a lot from them. Our team also developed an FAQ so that people could look at the different issues that they might be dealing with and see which sessions might be helpful to them in dealing with those sessions. So that was our third event. In all of those events, you can see we had a theme of mission possible, trying to really encourage the faculty and kind of set a positive tone. Our last event was mid-October, just last week. We had an in-service session that we planned and facilitated. And of course, our theme was grit, to drive student success, because we finished one 8-week term, but we still had 4 ahead of us, right? So it was a good start, but we weren't nearly done. And personally, I have quite a few courses to convert, and several of mine only run in the spring, right? So guess what? I haven't quite gotten those accomplished yet. So we wanted to really just encourage people to carry on and continue till we really finish our mission to get everything accomplished in an effective manner. And part of that is not just the initial conversion, but then to revisit those courses that we worked on, determine how well they went, make appropriate adjustments so that we can make it even better. Next slide, please. So in addition to helping to plan and facilitate the professional development, the other big thing that our team is engaged in is just really coaching and helping our faculty colleagues. So, one method that we used was we have this kind of centralized course in Canvas, Faculty Support Central, where a lot of great resources reside. Now, this course was actually developed by our academic excellence team, and we have a really good partnership with them. And 2 of our team members are actually on the academic excellence team. They developed this in March to really help us accelerate conversion to fully virtual. But what we do is we continue to add resources, our faculty team, to this. As we complete different training events or develop different resources, they get posted up on this course to kind of make it the centralized support place that people can go. The other thing that we do is, we also have some online live support sessions that are facilitated through this course. And all of the stuff that we did in June, all those virtual sessions, they were set up in this course. And so all the recordings are up there. So it really becomes a very valuable place to kind of focus the faculty support. In addition to these kinds of helps that we make available to our faculty colleagues, we also took all of the faculty groups and we kind of subdivided them and made some alignment between our team members and those faculty groups. So they would have a go-to person to get the faculty, the support they needed for their conversions. Next slide, please. So where are we going now? We're actually got a couple of things that we're focusing on for the future. And one of them is to help faculty take some of the themes that we had rolled out in our October in-service and move forward with those. So our keynote speakers spoke about humanizing online learning. And so we feel pretty strongly that, most of our courses have some elements of online learning embedded in them. Some of them are fully online, of course, and there's more and more we can do to make them even more effective in meeting our students' needs and helping them be successful. So that's a ongoing effort that we'll do. You can see this little snapshot is an image of a Padlet that we had created for our in-service activity. It was a way that faculty reflected on what couple of things they were going to implement that they took away from in-service. This has been embedded in our Faculty Support Central course. So you can see how we try to make these resources available on an ongoing basis. This, in fact, would be a platform where we could see what our colleagues are doing and maybe get some ideas of what we could do if we're not quite sure just yet. And it's going to be an ongoing tool that we'll have available there. The other thing, a couple more things that we want to do on an ongoing basis, we want to create some learning circles. So you can see the second image is really an example of a learning circle that we're setting up, which is a book club. You know, we have this nice book that really has some great strategies to help faculty. And so a couple of the faculty team members are going to facilitate that learning circle about this book during this current session, 8-week session in the fall. But we also thought there might be some additional learning circles that we set up based on the humanizing themes. Another idea that came up as we spoke with our keynote speaker last week was that perhaps we could establish a blog and have some postings put there so that we could highlight some best practices and other things that people are doing to help support really effective practices that work well in the 8-week format. So it could be humanizing practices or other practices that they're implementing. So those are some of our ideas. We continue to work with our faculty colleagues to help them finish the mission, so to speak, to get all of their courses converted. So I think that's all I have about our faculty team. We've had fairly good success, but we're still not done. So we're, it's a work in process. So now I turn it over to our next presenter, who is, I think, Rachel. Huh?
Yep, I'm up next. I'm Rachel Burling. So early in the presentation, you heard Jennifer talk about the program mapping and sequencing that occurred early on in the process through the work of the Domain 1 team. What I'm going to cover today is the next step in that process, which was to have Brad, our VP of Instruction, and our financial aid manager meet with our associate deans to review their final program map. And in these meetings, they were addressing 3 items. The first item was to make sure that courses were scheduled in a way that would allow students to receive a full-time financial aid package, which is very important. The second item was to make sure that programs are offering sequencing in each of the 5 terms. So historically at WCTC, we used the summer term as kind of a catch-up term, but in our new format, we wanted to ensure that summer was being utilized and that students could take full advantage of the term. And then the third item that they were covering in these meetings was to identify the reasoning for courses that were not converting to an 8-week format. So as you can imagine, the first 2 items were much easier than the last. And this is even despite all the work that had been done up to this point with converting those courses to an 8-week format. There were still some holdouts that didn't feel like they could successfully or adequately teach their course content in an 8-week format. And then, of course, they wanted to have their course remain in a 16-week format. But from a student's perspective, formats other than 8 weeks could definitely complicate their schedule and complicate their credit load as well. So there was value in minimizing the number of formats that we allowed it other than 8 weeks. So in these meetings, Brad and the financial aid manager were able to assess the reasoning for the format and determine if it was appropriate. In the end, the majority of the courses that were allowed to be taught in a format other than 8 weeks were clinicals and practicums because they relied on our external partners. In addition to identifying the reasoning for non-8-week courses, we also wanted to make sure that the start and end dates of these courses fell within the term or within the semester. So this allowed us in the registrar's office to consistently close out each term and run our end of term processing that's required. And it also allowed for the financial aid office the ability to award financial aid packages without too many modifications to the process or an overload of work on their staff. So with all that said, it leads me to the next important point. Involve, and actually go back one slide, Brad. Include your financial aid manager or leader from the ground floor planning. This will ensure that whatever model you put in place is compliant with the Department of Ed and will ensure that students' financial aid will not be affected by the changes that you implement. I can still remember being in a very early calendar planning meeting, and the term that was being thrown around was we need to remove the bookends from the semester and allow students to take courses when it made sense for them and for their program. And as a registrar, you can imagine I was gasping for air every time they said remove the bookends. And from a financial aid perspective, the removal of the bookends would change how the financial aid was set up and how aid could be distributed. And not to mention how taxing these processes would be on our current staffing model. So from that meeting on, both myself and the financial aid manager became very interested in being more involved in the calendar conversations to make sure that our perspectives were included. Because from our viewpoint, there were many implications that would occur, both positive and negative, by removing the bookends. As you know, we kept the bookends in place, and we did stick with 2 semesters that each semester had 2 parts of term, which were 8 weeks, and then our summer semester, which is also an 8-week term. The last point that I want to make is that as you are planning on implementing a new calendar model, there will be a need to assess all your policies and all of your procedures to determine if they need to be updated for the new format. And as you should also be prepared to make updates to policies that you or the college have maybe been holding off on, because Brad and Nicole wrote this in their blog. They said, you might as well just rip off the Band-Aid while you're implementing change. So be prepared for those types of policies as well. So to rattle off a couple policies and procedures that we had to assess, there were last day to withdraw, incomplete policy, financial aid census dates and disbursement dates, final grading deadlines. The list kind of goes on and on. And once you have made all the necessary updates, remember to leave time to communicate out the changes to students and to stakeholders. I have to say, from my perspective, reviewing and making the policy changes was the easy part. It was updating the documentation, the website, and then communicating out the changes that was the most time consuming. So make sure to build time to communicate your changes in your plan. As you know, we just finished up our first 8-week term. And I have to keep reminding myself that it doesn't have to be perfect. And COVID has definitely complicated a lot of things with the 8-week terms. So no matter how much preparation you do, there will always be items that you didn't address or things that didn't go as planned. So as these things come up, just be prepared to be agile and respond quickly, because the quicker that you respond and change things or put things in place, the smaller impact it will have on students. And I think that's it for my section. Chris, I think you're up next.
Thanks, Rachel. Hi, everybody. My name is Chris Daode, and as the Dean of Student Support at WCTC, I led a subgroup that worked to anticipate how WCTC student support services would need to be adjusted to best support onboarding and retention of students in an 8-week class format. So I'm going to highlight 3 areas. First, I'll focus on how we redesigned new student orientation to allow students to get onboarded at the beginning of each 8-week term. Next, I chose a phrase often used by the grumpy old man at my favorite donut shop in Milwaukee. When I'd walk in to pay, he'd say, "Change is good, exact change is better." Well, we have the same philosophical approach. I don't know if that's good or bad, that when it came to helping departments get out front of understanding how their departmental services, staffing, and budget demands would change with an 8-week calendar. We wanted to do that. We wanted to help them get out front of that. Finally, as I emphasize the importance of comprehensive communication, which I tried to emphasize in the lettering there, I will provide an example from our Student Accessibility Office, which is one of the departments most impacted by change. So on the next slide, we can see that designing new orientation is most challenged by getting students enough information to competently understand prioritized areas, but not give them so much information that they don't retain it. To guide this, we prioritize supporting the career, academic, and financial readiness of all students, and developed a comprehensive assessment plan to learn about that impact. Prior to COVID, we had decided to shift to an online NSO to allow students to almost continuously onboard throughout the year. A good plan, right? We had planned on kicking this off for fall term 1 this August, but then COVID reared its ugly head. The fact that we had already begun this planning allowed us to create an online NSO redesign in an incredibly short timeline. And before I go to the next slide, I do want to focus on the good news that we've just gotten, and that is that 90% or more of students reported understanding all of the desired competency areas, including financial aid and registration. So in addition to process changes, which we made a lot of, we also undertook some structural changes in our main campus entrance. This is a picture of WCTC's new Welcome Center, which in addition to being a more open and inviting space, is specifically designed to support prospective students in any stage of the onboarding process. So NSO and the new Welcome Center are a couple of examples of bigger changes, but we all know that the devil is in the details. So on the next slide, we knew that we had to create a process to engage departments in doing the best they could to anticipate the quote exact change from my grumpy donut guy that would need to happen within this shift to an 8-week model. So to accomplish this, we developed something we called the matrix of impact and change, and charged 18 different service areas, student service areas, with completing it almost a year in advance of the start of our first 8-week term. So the matrix asked departments to anticipate the impacts of significant risks associated with changing to an 8-week calendar and propose a planned response to that impact. In addition, departments were asked to identify any staffing and/or resources needed. So doing this almost a year in advance allowed the college to plan for resource and staffing changes, which thankfully were relatively limited for student services. Some services had almost no anticipated impact or risk changes, while others had a ton. So in the next slide, one of the areas that I mentioned earlier, the Student Accessibility Office, that serves students with documented disabilities. That's debatably been the most impacted student services area in the 8-week calendar shift, because some students, or because some disabilities like processing speed is a good example, were anticipated to be barriers to student success. The Student Accessibility Office took the bull by the horns, thankfully, and developed strategies and resources to offset any negative impact. The document that you're seeing on your screen was designed by the Accessibility Office to help students understand the calendar shift, and this was often used in individual student appointments with disability specialists. So on the back side of this document that you're not seeing is a list of several 8-week term strategies for success that those disability specialists would use to help prepare their students in anticipation of this shift. So this is one of the many examples of specified communication from the Student Accessibility Office and other offices that serve specific student populations, also custom designed communication to support success. In addition, the college developed a multifaceted communication plan to promote this shift. And this included anything from emails to videos, presentations, news releases, and just a ton of other communication efforts. And in fact, we had a whole sub-team designated to communication. So a good example of us working collaboratively with other sub-teams. So in conclusion, I do want to emphasize that while the change to an 8-week calendar seems to mostly overlap or mostly overtly impact the instruction side, it is essential to understand and prepare for how to best adjust your student services departments to meet the altered needs of students taking an 8-week course. So now I'm going to turn it over to Nicole Gahagan, and she'll provide some closing comments.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So one of the most important things that Brad and I did as leaders after we set the direction for the college is just get out of the way, basically. And we would encourage you to do the same. You have a number of experts and innovators on your campuses as well already, and we really just strongly encourage you to engage them. So this not only adds to the diversity of thought and just kind of opens up the landscape to even better ideas than you might have come up with as leaders of your institution, but it also helps you to infiltrate really the rest of your campus in a much more authentic and natural way. You have these early adopters and champions who are working diligently every single day on helping you to implement your initiative. And they're talking to their colleagues about it. And what this helps to do is to promote this initiative as something positive and not necessarily just like a top-down directive. And before you know it, this really helps give your initiative legs, and the communication and the excitement spreads across your campus in a much more genuine and, again, natural way. So I want to take this moment to thank Bethany, Jennifer, Brenda, Rachel, and Chris for joining us at this webinar for sure, and helping to give some of those details that you are intimately familiar with, but then also, of course, for all of your hard work throughout the last at least 3 years, in some cases more, to help prepare WCTC to meet 21st century learners' needs. Also want to take this moment to thank CCA for this opportunity and to highlight our transformational change work at WCTC through our 3-part blog and webinar series. So whether you're considering a change to your academic calendar or some other major pivot in the way that you serve your students to help promote student success broadly and at scale at your college or university, we just want you to know that you don't have to do it alone. Certainly Brad and I didn't. We relied not only on our own internal experts, but then also national pioneers too. And so we want to return that favor and just let you know that we're available to answer any questions that you might have, be sounding boards for you as you are facilitating change at your own campuses as well. Our contact information, CCA can make that available to you. It's available in our blogs as well. So with that being said, we'd like to open it up to some questions. We were answering some as we went, but I know that we missed some as well, and can certainly provide more details to anything that we answered briefly in the chat box.
There's a couple in chat, Nicole, instead of the Q&A. So.
Okay. So one of them, Chris, this one looks like it's for you. Regarding the redesign of new student orientation, how did you assess whether students were clear in their career, academic, and financial plan and arrived to the 90% measure of an early success rate? Was it through a survey?
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. I did put a brief response to that, or I tried to put a brief response to that in the chat, but just to give a little bit more detail, we used an online platform called Comevo. And in that process of providing that online orientation, it allows us to embed survey questions into that students are required to answer as they go through it. So the responses to those questions represented whether or not they knew the information that we wanted them to know. And that's what resulted in our 90% success rate. So 90% isn't perfect, and some of them were above 90%, but we want to make sure that every student has the accurate information to be able to be confident in their academic career and financial plan.
Great, thank you, Chris. Another question, and I know this is a question we get a lot, is in terms of faculty workload. This question specifically asks, how many credit hours do your faculty teach in an 8-week session?
So I can address that. Part of the additional work that we did with this is redesign of our faculty assignment model, where we really started to look at the entire academic year and the number of contact hours faculty are teaching. And so over the course of a year, we want them somewhere between 576 and 768 contact hours. How that spreads out over the course of the year really is a conversation between each faculty member and their associate dean. So some faculty might be teaching 3 courses in an 8 weeks, some might be teaching 2, some might be spreading their load out over the course of the entire year, some might be trying to contain it really to that traditional fall spring format. I'm not aware of any faculty right now teaching more than maybe 3 courses in an 8-week term.
Okay. There's another question here. Maybe Bethany can answer, maybe Jennifer, you have some familiarity as well. How do math students respond if they have to do a math core rec in 8 weeks? Is it 2 hours Monday, Friday, or Monday through Thursday, or more?
So we have a combination of approaches in math. Some of them are hybrids where they're meeting for a certain number of hours and then have the remainder online. Especially some of our higher level maths, we have more intensive meeting times throughout the week.
Okay. Rachel, maybe you can answer this one. Where do the 4-week sessions fit into the financial aid / semester calendar? So I think here they're talking about the winter interim and the spring interim.
Oh, okay. So our winter interim falls within our spring award package. So any courses that are taken during winter would be a part of their spring award. And then it really depends, like our spring interim, is that the other one?
The spring interim, yes.
Could be referring to. So spring interim would be a part of our spring term as well. So it's kind of an addition to both sides of the term.
All right. I'm just going to look at the chat again. I think we've covered all of the questions though.
One about the ELP courses, and it looks like maybe the response was just back to the panelists. So you might have to, Jennifer, you saw that one.
Oh, right. Okay. So we had one section of Intro to College Writing and English Composition in the 8-week format for the first time this fall. We had only one student of a full section who wasn't able to complete successfully. So out of the 22 students in there, 12 of them were ELP students. 1 did not complete successfully. But that's our first time through. So it's not a pattern yet.
All right. I don't see any other questions.
Right. Well, I think we've answered, or you all have answered all of the questions. Like Nicole mentioned, if you do have follow-up questions or would like any of the panelists' contact information, please reach me direct, or you can email info@completecollege.org and we'll follow up with whatever you requested. I want to thank all of our panelists, Nicole, Brad, Jennifer, Rachel, Chris, Bethany, and Brenda. You guys did an amazing job, and the information you shared is invaluable. And so I'm glad that this will live on our CCA website and YouTube for the foreseeable future. So if you need to refer back or need information, please access that. And I just want to give you a round of applause and thank you. And please be sure to register for our With Equity and Justice for All virtual event next week. Thank you.